So how did the United States of America become a democracy? It didn't start out that way. The only model we had was the British parliamentary system. So what happened? We know around us and just knowing about our own lives and our recent history that people mostly want to be left alone, to live their lives undisturbed, to raise their families, to pursue their livelihoods, participate in a local community, especially prior to the modern communication age. There might be great ideas and brave ideas in the air and issues in the air, such as those embodied in the Declaration of Independence. We need to understand that the Revolutionary War was an insurrection. It was a civil insurrection against what was at the time the established government, and these insurrections became part of a civil war. And the Civil War went on for 10 years. It's not that it was all American, all of the settlers and all of the inhabitants of the colonies rising up in arms against the British forces. It was a revolution, and it swept individuals in its path in dangerous and harmful ways. So we should look at it at starting out as a civil war, even though the rationale for its legitimacy had some very powerful and high-flown ideals. It's not the sort of thing that reached out to every settler who was swept up in it. There was also great opportunism, settling of grievances. There were settlers and others had some ideas about dispossessing people off the land, either those who presumably didn't seem to be loyal enough to whichever cause it was, and the settlers had and others had some ambitions with regard to the territories occupied by Native Americans. It's interesting that the British authorities were much more content to deal with the Native Americans and trade with them without much interest in expanding the colonies, and certainly not that interested in expanding settlement. The settlers had different ideas, and they were drawn in to these conflicts, as were the Native Americans, who were encouraged by one faction or another to participate in warfare against the opposing groups, or the settlers who favored the opposing groups. It's very messy business. It's not all high-flown idealism. It's not clear-cut. And it went on, as I said, for almost 10 years. At the end, 100,000, and this is in the colonies, in the population of the American colonies at that time, 100,000 loyalists left. They left the states for Canada, England, the Caribbean, and Florida. Florida is an interesting case. Florida was not one of the colonies. It was actually both occupied by the Spanish and by the British at the time of the end of these hostilities. And the British, in removing themselves from that part of the Americas, basically surrendered Florida to the Spanish. And later, there was a treaty with President Adams, by which the Spanish ceded Florida to the United States in exchange for the United States giving up its ambitions with regard to Texas. There were continuing insurrections and military actions within and among the states for another 50 years. It's not like this new federal system and the arrangement of the states and the new constitution brought peace and light. There was corruption. There was the exchange of power in the hands of one group to power in the hands of another group. And the seeds of democracy took root and flourished like an uncontrollable viney weed. I want to recommend this book by President Jimmy Carter. It's called The Hornet's Nest. It's written as a novel. It was published in 2003. I don't know when he began the writing of it. I won't call it a great work of literature, although I found that I cared a lot about the characters that I was introduced to and what would become of them. There's some soap opera, there's some drama, um, it's mostly narrative, and the although it may be difficult to follow at times, one of the most important aspects of the book is to shed some light on what the turmoil around the Revolutionary War really was, and how complex it was, and how much it left people threatened and conflicted and exposed to harm from all sides. President Carter chooses to focus on Georgia and sort of the historical roots of the part of the country that he knows the best. So I recommend this both for its compassion, for its concealing of the lives of people at the time and how difficult it was to be swept up in these events, and also for how unpredictable and chaotic and chancy the emergence of a stable democracy was in those times. On that thought, have a wonderful and reflective Independence Day. I'll be seeing you around the internet.